Sort of bugged me to have the fan there. I don't mind if it was hot outside, but anyway, Genesis. We are close to the end with Genesis. 50 chapters in the first book of the Bible covers roughly 2,000 years. The next 65 books covers the next 2,000 years. Isn't that something? Of those 50 chapters in Genesis, those 2,000, half of the book of Genesis covers one man, 137 years. Half of all of it. It's sort of, I don't know. I just thought you guys might want to know. I find that interesting. It explains, when you open up right away, it shows us God. How we got here. The God of all creation just spoke into being, and stars and sun and planets, earth, water, fish, birds, animals, all of the grain crops and trees, and mankind. Right away it tells us exactly how we got there. And then it shows that man and God and all of nature were in this really neat relationship where there was trust and compassion and communication, and everything was in harmony. Perfect, right? And God looked at all of that, His creation that He made, and the unity, and He said it is very good. He allowed man this Garden of Eden that He planted Himself. You didn't have to work for food, you just walked up to the tree, right? You just ate whatever you felt like that day. We had everything, if there was kind of a dull day, you didn't know what to do, you named a few animals, right? That's what your job was. Whatever you call them, you just name them. That's what they're going to be. Well, that's cool. Only thing, you want to maintain this relationship forever? Just don't eat of that tree, He said. That's the only one. Everything else is yours. Just don't be disobedient in that area of God's Word. And of course, we also know that the very first part of Genesis shows the division of man. How sin conquered man, really, on that day when we chose to listen to our flesh, listen to what Satan had to offer, question what God was really saying, and it's been that way ever since. The relationship ceased to exist between man, between nature, and between God. In fact, God not only curses man, and man now dies in our flesh, but He also curses nature. So Tim and Jim have to spray for weeds because of Adam and Eve, right? He cursed the ground and allowed those things to take place. However, it also sort of talks about God's grace. God didn't just say, I'm finished with man. If that's what man is going to be, I'll turn my back on him forever. Adam and Eve can die and then we'll start all over. He didn't do that. You also see God's grace getting started. And you see how some people, even though there's some division, it's less harmony in the relationships, we still have people of faith. And so we saw Abel, who gave a greater sacrifice than Cain. And we see Enoch, who lived such a righteous life. He was just taken up to God in heaven one day. We see Noah, when the rest of the world was just about sin, Noah wanted to live a righteous life, a faithful life. And then we came to Abraham. And there was something with Abraham and just his relationship with God Almighty. God saw in Abraham and spoke to him and told Abraham that He did want this relationship. And now He spells it out. This relationship between God and man isn't over just because of the Garden of Eden. And in his seed, in Abraham's seed, something in the line of Abraham where all the nations will be blessed. That's a promise from God. And we see it didn't happen with Abraham, it didn't happen with Isaac, but it was in that line. Isaac had 2 sons. It wasn't in the oldest son, but the younger son, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And as we saw last week when we read how Jacob prophesied over each of the men, blessing each one according to what God was. It was Judah, the fourth child down the line, the fourth boy, born to Leah and Jacob. In Judah, the scepter will never depart. There will be a king on the throne forever and ever from the line of Judah. Genesis starts with this, wow, creation, and then right away, the death of man. We're going to die. We're all going to die. These bodies are not going to be able to exist forever. Our eyes have been open to sin. We're born in this sinful nature now, and we have to be restored somehow. Some are, some aren't. You'll see that. And also, so it starts with promise and hope, and then all of a sudden, the sin and death of man. But it kind of ends with the sin and death of two men, Jacob and Joseph. And so today, we're going to look a little bit at the death of Jacob. Chapter 49, the last couple of verses, starting in verse 29. Jacob charged them, his sons, and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. And then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. And when the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now, therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, then I will return. And Pharaoh said, Go up, bury your father, as he made you swear. When I was 28 years old, my grandpa would have been about 75 years old, and he passed away. We were close. My grandpa and I were close. My grandma and grandpa, we spent a lot of time, lots of holidays together. It was a shock to me when he passed away. I didn't even know he was in the hospital. He went in the hospital, he couldn't breathe. Went into the hospital, and sometime that night he passed. Because in fact, my grandma went back home. He thought it was going to be okay, but he passed away very peacefully. Sometime in the night. My grandfather drank and smoked all his life. He always had a bottle stuck in the pump house or garage or someplace in the basement. Because Grandma didn't like it when Grandpa was drinking, and so he always had to sneak it. And he smoked a couple packs of cigarettes all his life. 60 years he smoked and drank. 2 years before my grandpa died, my mom and dad took him to a revival service, an evangelistic revival service in the Catholic Church. My grandmother was Catholic, never missed a Sunday. My grandpa was a Lutheran, never made it on a Sunday. He had nothing to do with church his whole life. But on that day, he came to church. And he went with my mom and my dad and my grandma. And this priest was an evangelist. He was not like a regular priest who had a church. He'd go around and try to bring revival to the Catholic Church. And during this service, he is trying, he did have an altar call later on for healing and prayer. But he asked if anybody's relationship with Jesus isn't right, that he would like to pray with them. And if you're not living your life for Christ, you need to get it right. And you know, is there anyone here, and can we pray for you? My grandfather raised his hand. Okay. My grandfather raising his hand, the Lutheran grandfather raising his hand in the Catholic Church, would have been like, when I just said that, my grandfather raised his hand, would have been like you guys going, wow, Pastor, let's have an amen. Huh? But you guys didn't do that. But if you did do it, it would have been just like my grandfather raising his hand. It was like a miracle. Those 2 years that he lived and spoke about Jesus a little bit, about the relationship, he's just a changed man. Way humbler guy than he had ever been, you know, in the 26 years before that I'd known him. That's how Grandpa passed away, in peace. Life-changing event 2 years earlier. I was 40 years old. We just went into the ministry, just moved to Mont, but before we did, I wanted to make sure I said goodbye to my grandmother, gave her a big hug, you know, and stuff, and we left the family. And about 10 days after I started in Mont, we got a phone call. My grandmother was 87, hardly sick a day of her life, hard-working woman, you know, just always on the go and always cooking or baking something or doing something. And she was just walking one day and she just collapsed. No real physical, or they don't really know why, but she collapsed. Brought her to the hospital in Duluth, and we were called, and so our whole family went out there to Duluth to see my grandma. This is maybe the second day that she was there, and relatives all over, all gathered together, lots of relatives to say, you know, goodbye or to be with my grandmother. I remember Linda's prayer for my grandma. We knew that she was going to die. You know, they get kind of unplugged all this stuff, and we knew it was just a matter of time where they slowly pass away. And I remember Linda's prayer to my grandma, like, it's okay, Grandma, you can let it go. It's all right, you know, to be with Jesus now. It's a better place, or something like that. And that, you know, my mom on the fourth day, my mom was the only one with my grandma at the time. It was early in the morning. My grandmother never gained consciousness, but when she died, my mom described it as she opened her eyes. My mom had her hand in her hand, and my grandmother opened her eyes, sat up a little bit, smiled, and went, closed her eyes and just lay down. Peaceful. I mean, it's just like, wow. Kind of neat. My grandmother knew where she was going, I think. I mean, she might have had some question about it, but we knew where my grandmother was going. And my grandfather. They had this relationship. They lived a good life. You know, they lived as righteous a life as what I think they could have lived. And so there was peace on that last day, that just like Jacob sighed, breathed his, you know, put his feet up, sighed, breathed his last years with all of his children. My grandparents, kind of interesting. I never heard them say a kind word to each other in my life. They were always fighting every day. You drink too much. You crap on me too much. You know, that's why I drink. And, you know, it was never ending. But somehow all of that meant love, because when they died, they each got plots next to each other. So in life, they were always separated, but in death, they wanted to be right next to each other, you know, elbow to elbow. Anyway, ironic. Planning for a funeral. This is kind of a weird statement, isn't it? Planning for a funeral? But that's what Jacob did. Jacob planned for this day. My grandparents planned for this day. What you do between now and then, you know, is important. Abraham, in chapter 23 of Genesis, bought the plot of land with a cave. When Sarah passed away, he wrapped her, I'm sure, and put her in the cave. When Abraham died, Isaac and Ishmael put their father in that cave. When Rebekah died, the same thing. When Isaac passed away, Esau and Jacob put their father in that cave. So, is that how we're supposed to get buried? In caves? Is that the biblical approach? Is that the only way we're supposed to be buried? I mean, Jesus was buried in a cave. So anything else, anything short of that is not biblical? Or is it cultural? I get not a lot of questions, not tons of questions, but you do funerals and stuff and people wonder what should we do? Is there a difference? Is there opinion? Is there something biblical or non-biblical? So that's how they got buried. Some of the kings got buried in the ground. Jacob was embalmed. So does that mean he was, because he was in Egypt and he had this long trip, he was embalmed, put in a casket, and then brought over there. So is embalming really the way to go about? Well, that's what the Egyptians did. The point is this, and I think everybody should plan that day so that people don't have to go, what should we do? We don't know what we should do. They never said what we should do. Jacob knew where he was going, what he wanted done. My grandma and grandpa knew where they wanted their final resting place and what they wanted done. But there's some people, they have some contention about, say, being cremated, for example. If you get cremated, does that mean you won't go to heaven? Is that going to be the determining factor of your final resting place? Is cremation, or do you have to be embalmed and then entombed? Do you have to be below ground or above ground? Do you have to be facing a certain direction, or does it make any difference? What happens to people who in war, if a bomb hits them in war and there is no body, they're just obliterated? What happens to those people? What happened to the Christians who were burned at the stake? Cremated, if you will. Burned at the stake, there's nothing left of them. Or the ones who are eaten by lions and torn apart, there's nothing, are they not in heaven? You see what I mean? The point is, it doesn't really make, I don't think, any heavenly difference on your burial. But it's going to make the world a difference, not how you die, but how you live. How you live your life. Now, Jacob did have those arrangements. I think everybody should make those arrangements. Maybe you don't want to be cremated, or maybe you do want to be cremated, or whatever. It's your choice. I don't think there's a right and wrong biblically to that. I don't see that biblically to that anyway. It's where you end up that's important. For eternity, that's the important part. Jacob finished speaking. He drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Do you know that most of the world does not believe in the resurrection of the dead? They don't believe that there's a place called heaven and a new body that you're going to get and enjoy, an eternity with Jesus. What does gathering to your people mean? What did that mean when he was gathered to? Somebody's already there, wherever Jacob is, but he's in the bed, and he's in a tomb, and he's in a casket. I mean, where did he? And he went right then and there. As soon as he died, he was gathered to his people. It didn't mean he was gathered to his people when he went into the cave, where his parents and grandparents were. The instant he died, he was gathered to his people. Where and what is that? Do you remember Enoch? I mentioned Enoch. Where did Enoch go? He didn't die, but where did Enoch go? He didn't go to hell. Heaven. Okay, that's what I think. He's with God in heaven. Same with Elijah. When God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and as they're heading out, and God's going to tell them exactly where to go, Isaac says, we got the fire, we got the wood, Father, but where's the lamb? Where's the sacrifice? And Abraham said that God would provide the sacrifice. Hebrews 11 explains that whole event that says, by faith, Abraham was tested, and he offered up Isaac. Abraham, who had received the promises from God, offered up his only begotten son, concluding or believing that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. So you see, even way back then, they understood that there was a life after death. Something else is there. This is not the end of the game. When Moses, and we'll talk about him in a few weeks, when Moses is in the desert and he sees the burning bush, the story, he goes there, he's talking about, who should I say you are? I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. He didn't say, you know who I am? I was the God of Abraham, meaning he's ceased to exist. I am the God of Abraham, meaning him and Abraham, he's still God of Abraham. Abraham still is in existence. When they tested Jesus about this, and the Sadducees, who were part of the teachers of the law, did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They just thought you ceased to exist. And so Jesus said, do you know in that passage, that burning bush passage, where Moses said, that God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac. Jesus says, he's the God of the living, not of the dead. So there is a resurrection from the dead. And the Pharisees are like, yeah, because we believe that. That's a good point. It's a great point. We never thought of it. We never saw that in the scriptures. Jesus speaks about the resurrection of the dead, or life and death, punishment and reward. He mentions the rich man and Lazarus, the poor man. The rich man had everything he wanted to in this world. Lazarus was just outside his door. It says Lazarus hoped, Lazarus wished that he could receive the crumbs that the rich man didn't eat, that was left on his table. He was like, oh, I'd take even that. Would you allow me that? Then it says one day the Lazarus died and angels took him up. And then eventually the rich man died. And you know the story. The rich man looks up and there's Lazarus and there's Abraham, still alive, by the way, 2,000 years later. Still, Abraham is right there. Then the rich man said, Father Abraham, it says he looked up, so that's why heaven's up and hell's down. Abraham, Father Abraham, would you allow Lazarus to just dip his finger in some water and just touch I'm just parched, it's just the suffering down here. And Abraham explains to him, you had everything back then and nothing. You lived your life as so selfish. You didn't help anyone, never did a kind thing. No, you get what you deserve. As a matter of fact, he couldn't come there even if he wanted to. There is a gap between heaven and hell that no one can bridge. It is appointed to all men once to die, and then after that there is judgment. There's no third or fourth chances. This is it. This is it. You make your life right with God and with man, and you can enjoy, as Abraham and Isaac and Jacob did, life and then life after. Or you can be like the rich man and live your life in that respect. Paul addresses to Timothy in Philippians and says, for to me, Timothy, to live is Christ and to die is gain. So what kind of life did Paul live that he enjoyed so much? Well, he just enjoyed being able to share the gospel, a gospel of hope, of the resurrection of the dead, of reconciliation with God and with man, and forgiveness. He loved to preach forgiveness. He loved to tell them of God's grace, how Jesus defeated sin and death, that there is hope after this world, and to change it. That was Paul. Some people accepted it, some rejected it, but he loved to live it and to preach it as Christ. He lived as Christ, as his disciple. Like every person in this room is a disciple of Jesus. Needs to live in that same way, because to live is Christ, to die is gain. Do you fear death? I don't think my grandparents feared death. You didn't see it on their face, anyway. Fearing death, I think they knew that there was something more for them. Just like each of us, but you have to live that way, Paul says. He tells Timothy in 2 Timothy, perhaps the last letter that Paul wrote. He said, I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. He's about to die. He's about to be executed for his faith. He's being poured out. He knows he's only got whatever days or weeks left. But he has fought the good fight, finished the race. He never stopped partway and said, you know, I think I'm going to start doing something else. Or this Christianity has been taking its toll. I've gone to too many shipwrecks. I've been thrown out of too many cities. I've been cast out of too many synagogues. I'm just sick and tired of being rejected. No, he kept fighting because one more person might have heard. One more person is going to enter kingdom because of him. Kingdom of God because of him. One more person made a life change because of Paul. So he kept fighting the good fight. He says, he's finished the race. He can't do anything else. I'm about to die. He says, in all of that, I've kept the faith. Whew. That's a powerful statement, friends. Can you say that? I wish I could say that with a lot of boldness. I try, but I know I also failed. But I want to keep the faith. Paul finishes by saying, finally, remember I said to live is Christ, to die is gain? What do you gain? Paul says, finally there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to every person who have loved his appearing, to every single person who goes out and to live like Christ, receive the same reward that Paul himself has received. Everlasting life and his crown of victory and glory. The Apostle John on the island of Patmos, when he had the vision called Revelation, writes this in Revelations 21. I saw a new heaven. John saw this day of when we all gather together in a certain place. Not just heaven, but this day. He said, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there's no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he shall dwell among them. And they shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them. And he shall wipe every tear from their eyes. And there shall no longer be death. There shall no longer be mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. A new Eden. You've got a new body. You need a new place to live. You need a new place to dwell. So there is a new heaven, a new earth, a new beginning once again where God can look at it all and it's all in harmony. Nature and man and God, and say once again, it is very good. And you'll all be part of that. You'll all be part of that. If we will live as disciples, as Jesus Christ, from the very short time that we're in this body. No one knows when that last day is going to come. Jacob seemed to have an inclination. Even Paul seemed to know that he was, but none of us really know, do we? And so you must stand up, you must stand out, and we would be assured that one day we'll be in that place called heaven. And there should be no fear of death, no sting of death, no victory for Satan on that day. The victory is yours, and it is Jesus Christ. And in that moment, and in that time, when you see him, you stop living by faith, because now you'll be living by sight in all his glory. Amen. Amen.